Plugged In podcast, a new project from the Institute for Energy Research. To find out more about our work, visit our website at instituteforenergyresearch.org.
Welcome to the Plugged In podcast. I'm Alex Stevens, a policy analyst at the Institute for Energy Research.
And I'm Jordan McGillis.
Joining us today to discuss Colorado's Proposition 112 is Kelly Sloan, an Energy and Environment Fellow at the Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University, a columnist with Colorado Politics, and the Policy Director at Principles That Matter. Kelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So before we get into Prop 112, let's discuss the oil and gas industry in Colorado. How big of a role does the industry play in Colorado's economy, and what impact has the industry's growth had in your community?
Sure. Well, it's had a huge impact in Colorado. It's a huge part of our economy. It's probably the principal driver of the Colorado economy. Of course, everybody talks about our marijuana industry, but that's pennies compared to what the oil and gas industry contributes to the state. Last year, the oil and gas industry contributed $31 billion to our state's economy. Now, to put that in a bit of perspective, our state budget is about $30 billion. So, to say it's an important part of the economy, it's kind of an understatement. It supports something in the area of 240,000 jobs, $23 billion in wages, and pretty critically, when you look at the impact on local communities, is the revenue generation that's created. Over the last few years, every year it's generated about $1 billion to state and local governments for roads and bridges, local infrastructure, police, fire, emergency services, school districts, that kind of thing. The jobs in oil and gas in the state account for about 7% of the state's total employment. There's roughly 1,100 businesses in the state that are in one way or another supporting oil and gas, part of that supply chain. Then we get back to the tax numbers. In 2015 and 2016, the industry was responsible for about $840 million directly going to K-12. So, and over the last 8 years, we're looking about $8 million in severance tax. So, these are huge numbers. These are bigger numbers than any other sector of the state's economy. So it's a big deal, in terms of what it provides for the state.
Absolutely. And so Election Day is only about 20 days away, and there's an initiative on Colorado's ballot that would have serious implications for the energy industry, and from what it sounds like, you're saying for Colorado's economy as well. So can you explain what Proposition 112 is, and maybe just give us a brief history of the backstory of how this proposal got on the ballot and who's behind it, and just sort of the background information of the proposal? Sure.
Well, so ostensibly, what the measure does, quite simply, is establishes a 2,500-foot setback. That's roughly half a mile for any oil and gas equipment, not just wells, but tanks, pipelines, other elements of the gathering system, any oil and gas infrastructure. 2,500-foot setback from any building, any dwelling, any property line around a school, a hospital, that kind of thing, and critically, from any water source, which can include intermittent streams, puddles, that are intermittent streams are those that, maybe once every couple, 3-5 years, there's actually water in them, and any other what they term as vulnerable areas, which can be pretty much anything that they want to decide that means, riparian areas, wetlands, you name it. What it would do in practical matters would be to drive the oil and gas industry out of the state. It would eliminate 85% of the surface area of the land from any oil and gas activity whatsoever. Not just drilling, not just fracking, but any of the other activities that go along with that, putting in gathering systems, water treatment, that kind of thing.
Kelly, would this affect existing energy infrastructure and projects, or are we talking about just new things?
Well, it's new things, but any additional work you'd want to do on any wells, if you need to bring in a workover rig or something, that wouldn't be allowed either. So any new work that has to be done, adding on to existing pipelines, anything like that, would certainly be affected. But absolutely, it's directed at any new new production. But the industry is growing by bounds out here. We have two major basins in the state. In the western part of the state, the western slope, we have the Piceance Basin, which is a major tight gas play, a little bit of oil up in the northern part of it. And over in the eastern part of the state, the most prolific basin we have right now is Denver-Julesburg, which is a shale oil play north and northeast of Denver. And it's got years of life left in it. It's a lot of activity out there, and that would all come to a screeching halt if these pass. If you take out federal land, you're looking at a 94% of the non-federal service area would be eliminated from any further oil and gas activity.
Would this be a completely new set of regulations, or how is the industry operating? What sort of regulatory structure is it operating under right now?
Great. So ironically, we are already one of the toughest states for oil and gas production. We have the toughest sets of regulations in the country. We already have setbacks. There's currently a 500-foot setback from any occupied dwelling, and 1,000 feet from any high occupancy dwelling, so like a hospital or a school. So we already have setbacks. We've got some of the toughest water rules. We have rules in place that you have to do water sampling before and after drilling. That we were the first state to bring that in. The tightest methane rules in the country. This is a well-regulated industry in Colorado. The arguments you hear from the pro-112 side that we need this to, protect communities and protect our health and safety. That's just hogwash. The industry is already well-regulated. There are no studies out there that indicate that oil and gas production is causing any harm to anybody's health. So this is really just a thinly veiled attempt by some radical elements of the environmental left to do away with the industry.
What I see here as an advocate for the free market is regulation being implemented that's really unnecessary, because these issues could be addressed through contracts of the parties in question. If there is a noxious gas or some other form of pollution that an industrial project is emitting, the property owners around that area would have the right to go to the courts and reach a settlement with the industrial company. I'm wondering, Alex, what you think about that, and if this is an area where we would have an opportunity for bargaining rather than regulation.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. As Kelly mentioned, with the reading that I've done on this proposal, at least, there aren't any studies that are showing that there are negative health effects from oil and gas drilling at the distances that they're talking about, that at least justify regulating.
Right, and when we would
regulating the industry at the distances that they're talking about here. So,
and when we go through
theoretically,
the courts, we go through the courts, so we would assess that question of whether there is there is evidence of a harm being committed by one party. And in this case, we're not doing that, right, Kelly? It sounds like we're just asking voters to step in and intervene when there may not even be an actual conflict between parties.
Well, absolutely. We've used in Colorado, the industry has been very proactive in reaching out to local communities and local governments and working with them. We've been using memorandums of understanding for several years that have worked very well, with communities to figure out how we're going to drill, where they're going to drill, all that kind of thing. So, no, you're absolutely right. There's no need either scientifically or legally to impose this kind of a setback, which again, the effect of it will be to eliminate oil and gas production, and that's what they want. They're not, the proponents of 112 are not honest brokers in the sense like they're trying to portray in some of their ads and some of their campaign. They're like, hey, we just want to make sure that our children are protected and our water is protected. It already is. There's been 26 studies, at least, every one of which has demonstrated that hydraulic fracturing does not contaminate groundwater. There's been no evidence of groundwater contamination from that process. So why do we need to impose this amount of setback, this amount of regulation? It's very, very clear that this is an attempt by some of the more extreme, some more radical and fanatical elements of the environmental movement to do away with the industry. And it's something they've tried before. A very similar setback measure was proposed for the ballot 4 years ago. That it was ultimately pulled off by the sponsor, who incidentally is running for governor right now. It was pulled off as part of a negotiation with the governor at that time to form a task force to go around the state and work out some of these issues.
Regarding the environmental fanatics, as you put it, I'm wondering if you can speak to any cultural bifurcations or divisions within the state, because I know we have, on the one hand, the proponents for this measure, and the same sorts of people are filing lawsuits in Boulder County and San Miguel County against oil companies, but also, as you mentioned, such a large portion of the state's economy is centered on energy. So is there a big division here culturally?
Yeah, there is. A lot of this is coming out of Boulder. Boulder is a little, it's a kind of bedroom community of Denver to the northeast, and it's always been a hotbed of liberalism for decades. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. There's no oil and gas production happening in Boulder. In fact, you go to the places where this production is happening in Weld County, Cheyenne County over in the in the eastern part of the state, over in Rio Blanco and Garfield counties in the west. You go to those places, they want it. They live with it. They know what the real impacts are. And voters out there consistently vote for pro oil and gas candidates and to support the industry. It's people living in these little bubbles of fanaticism in places like Boulder and Aspen and Telluride and Denver that are kind of pushing all this. The interesting thing to note, though, is a lot of people you would initially think might be supportive of such a measure haven't been. There's been some pretty bipartisan consensus that this is just a nightmare economically. The mayor of Denver, he's a Democrat. He's spoken out against it. The current Democratic governor candidate, who has a history of environmental activism, even he's against this. Now, we can speculate as to whether that's more political or if he's doing it for pragmatic reasons. But still, it's worth noting that even a lot of the major environmental groups are staying away from this, knowing that it's the impact, should this pass, will be so devastating that it would provide a pretty dark black mark on the environmental movement for years to come.
Yeah, I was surprised just doing my research before this, the number of editorial boards of newspapers in the state that came out against the proposal as well. Thought that was pretty interesting. So it does seem like there's sort of widespread opposition against this. People are seeing that the economic costs of this are going to be rather significant. You talked a little bit about the numbers in terms of economic costs in our opening here. I know there's been a couple of reports from the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and from REMI that have come out that have talked a little bit about the numbers. If you could just go over that again, just to give our listeners a sense of what exactly the economic costs of this proposal passing would be.
Sure. Well, there's an economic think tank, Common Sense Policy Roundtable, that partnered with REMI earlier this year to, try and distill some of these numbers, what the impacts would be if this passes. And they're predicting that it would eliminate $26 billion from Colorado's GDP on an annual basis. Our tax revenues would be reduced by $1 billion per year. We would lose upwards of 147,000 jobs by 2030. And interestingly, over 3/4 of those jobs, about 77% of those jobs, won't be directly in the oil and gas industry. Of course, all the oil and gas industry jobs will be gone, but it's also going to eliminate things like real estate, construction, retail, hotels, you name it, all these other jobs and industries that are built around, this key core base industry that we have here. So the impact's not going to just be on the quote unquote oil towns that directly support the industry, and it's not just going to be the Whiting Petroleum and Kerr-McGee and Schlumberger and those direct energy jobs. It's going to be jobs within these towns and in the big cities too. I office in downtown Denver, and I'd say probably half of the offices you see down here are involved in oil and gas somehow, either directly or through through land and real estate, or through financing, or through legal, or you name it. It's difficult to overstate just how ingrained the oil and gas industry is, how in the state, what an integral part of our economy it is, and by extension, just how bad this measure will be if it passes and succeeds in driving that industry out of the state. Just one more number here for you. The State Land Board has calculated that 112, if it passes, will eliminate something on the order of $230 million from school funding. And of course, education funding is always a discussion that we have in the state. Everybody wants. We saw a bunch of protests earlier this year. Everybody wants teachers to be paid more. Everybody knows how important education is. Well, and there's even tax measures, local and statewide to ostensibly to fund education. Well, if we're eliminating a major source of funding for schools, where does that leave our children? Now, the impacts of this go far beyond just the industry itself, which is important enough. It's going to reach into just about every aspect of the Colorado economy.
That's certainly something that's overlooked. I think a lot of the work that we do here at IAR, we see a lot of instances where people are overlooking, the second and third order effects of regulation and these sort of policies and ideas. Let me just fire one more question at you before we go. As you know, IAR is a think tank here based in DC, so a lot of our listeners might not be from Colorado. In your opinion, why should people who aren't from Colorado be paying attention to Prop 112? Do you think that this has broader implications in terms of policy in other states?
Well, absolutely. The same people that are behind this measure 112 here. They're all over the country, and they're not going to be satisfied just with driving the industry from Colorado. I mean, they want it banned. This is all part of the Keep It in the Ground movement, and it's not just keep it in the ground in Colorado. They're coming. They're going to go elsewhere next. Colorado has kind of a reputation politically as a bit of a testing ground. A place where you can try out your ideas, good, bad, or otherwise. You saw with legalization of marijuana, for instance. The idea is if you can get something like this, something this radical, passed in fairly ordinary, run-of-the-mill, purple, straight down the middle state like Colorado. It's one thing if you pass something like this in a place like California. They expect it there. That's easy. Colorado's a little different. It's more working class. It's more mainstream. If they can get it done here, then you can bet they're going to try going to places like Pennsylvania and Ohio. They may even try Louisiana. Heck, they may even try Texas. Good luck. But or New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, Montana, North Dakota. They're not going to stop just here. This is the first step. So if you're living in parts of the country where you have a lot of oil and gas production, where it's a major part of your economy, California still as well, for that matter, I'd be very concerned about this. I'd keep a close eye on it, and because it could be coming to your back door next. No, it's got wider implications than just inside the state. That's for sure.
Sure. So just before we go, what else are you guys working at the Centennial Institute? Give our listeners an idea of some other projects that you're working on and where they can find more about your work in Colorado there. Sure.
Well, Centennial Institute, we have fellows across the board. I work on a number of different issues, criminal justice, economic, so on and so forth. In terms of energy, when you might be interested, some of your listeners might be interested in, the governor of Colorado earlier this year in June signed an executive order committing Colorado to sign on to California's low emission vehicle standards. Not to get into too much detail now, but that's going through a rulemaking currently, and that's going to be another one that's going to have a huge impact on Colorado. Those low emission vehicle standards and the zero emission standards, which are coming next, again because of some of the more fanatical elements of the environmental movement, kind of pushed that discussion into that realm. But that waiver that California got to the federal standard to exceed the federal standards. Those are written for California with its large urban population, its relatively mild winters, its different geography, you name it. Well, to try and import that to a place like Colorado, where of course half our state is mountainous, we have a large rural population, long distances between towns in many places, don't have the huge population centers like Los Angeles. We're an SUV state. We're a light truck and SUV state. About 75% of the vehicles purchased here fall into light truck and SUV categories because we have those harsh winters. We get the snows. We have you can't pull a horse trailer with a Chevy Bolt. You certainly can't get up some of those mountain passes. So that's going to be that's a fight that's going on right now. It's in a public comment period for the month of October. And that's something else we're looking at as well. So there's energy is always one of the key issues in the state, and there's always something happening along that front. And in principles that matter, we've been putting out policy papers as well to talk about this and kind of break it down, some of these issues down into more bite-sized elements that the average person that's not a policy wonk can kind of digest a little bit better. So it's an exciting state to live in terms of energy issues and energy politics, that's for sure.
Great. Our guest today has been Kelly Sloan of the Centennial Institute. Kelly, thank you again for speaking with us.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you very much.